Welcome to Better Than Ever Live. Wherever you're watching or wherever you're listening, if you're listening to the podcast version, hope you're making today your masterpiece. In this Better Than Ever Live, we're going to talk about a peptide. Backed by popular demand, we're going to talk about peptides. We're going to talk about a specific one called Thymosin Beta 4. If you haven't heard about it, we'll discuss what TB4 is, how it works, what conditions it might potentially help treat, where you might potentially get it, and how you might use it. My name is Dr. David Geier, double board certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, and media medical expert. I help you feel and perform your best regardless of age, injury, or medical history. I'm going to say this multiple times as we talk about peptides, but please understand in today's show, as with any video on my entire YouTube channel or my entire website, everywhere, Facebook, LinkedIn too, this is not meant for medical advice. This is general information and meant for educational purposes only. Now, if you have comments about peptides and Thymosin Beta 4 or any of the studies we talk about before we get into Thymosin Beta 4, please leave those in the chat, not in the comments, but in the chat. I can only see the comments in the chat, and that's what I'll respond to. If it's in the comments, I probably won't see it because I am not actually on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm using a service called Restream, which shows me the chat. But please leave those. I'd love it if you'd leave your first name, maybe where you're located, along with your comment or question. I will tell you on the front end, I'm not feeling all that great today, so if I seem sort of down, low energy, I'm trying not to be that way, but sorry, it's just some days are like that. Plus, you've heard me talk a lot about how Charleston is amazing, great weather, it's on the beach, great restaurants. There's so many great things about Charleston. Our weather's been kind of crummy today, so as much as I brag about our weather, we've had just nonstop rain for what feels like 24 hours. So maybe that's part of it. Also, next week, we're going to stick with the 5 p.m.s. I told you I switched just because it was getting really hard to do in the middle of the day with my practice and just increasing numbers of patients. So we're going to stick with 5 p.m., but starting next week, we're going to go a little bit back to the way the show used to be. More health studies and maybe not one long discussion. It'll be a little closer to what it is today because the main discussion is pretty short today, but it'll be a little bit about that kind of thing. But if you have comments on any of the studies, if you have comments on Thymosin Beta 4, definitely or leave those. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. Also, tomorrow, I'll try to remember and say this at the end, I will be here tomorrow, like every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time for Ask Dr. Geier Live. So if you have medical questions, injury questions, anything like that, please bring those tomorrow. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is your risk as you get older of cardiovascular disease, things like heart attacks, things like strokes. The number one killer in the United States is cardiovascular disease. And yes, we've known over and over and over, we've seen studies, you've heard it. I talk about it on TV a fair amount. Exercise lowers your risk of cardiovascular disease. Not a shock, right? But especially as we get older, cardiovascular disease and death from it is more and more likely. And so the question is, if you've been sedentary all your adult life, now you're getting to 65 or so, and you're like, all right, I got to do something so that I don't die in the next 5 years of a heart attack or stroke. Maybe it's time to start exercising. There was a study just published in the journal Heart that looked at how you might actually do that, when you might actually do that to actually lower your risk of dying of cardiovascular disease. They looked at over 3,000 Italians, all aged 65 or older. And then again, they looked for cardiovascular diseases like coronary heart disease, heart failure, stroke, and then they categorized each of the, or put into different categories, each of the 31-ish hundred Italians into 4 groups. And it was stable low exercise, meaning at their age, 65, 70, whatever it was, they got low levels of activity and it was pretty stable for a long period of time. They had a group that was high. They did high levels of activity, but as they got older, the amount of activity got less. They did people that were low but increasing, basically low levels of exercise, but they said, hey, I'm going to start doing more exercise, and they did more and more and more as they got older. And then the ones that were stable high, they did a lot of physical activity and kept it up. And what they found is the biggest risk reduction was men more than women, but that's not really the point. It was the earlier you started in late life, between 70 and 75 years old, had the greatest reduction in cardiovascular risk. And all they had to do was 20 minutes a day of physical activity. And I mean, yeah, you would love it if it was high intensity interval training or going for a run, but I mean, it can be going for a brisk walk. It can be stationary bike. It can be Zumba classes. It can be pickleball. My parents, and I shouldn't say this on social media, but I don't think they'd mind because it's absolutely true. They play pickleball like 6 days a week. It's the craziest thing. It's I've never seen two people so into a sport before. Anything like that, I would tell you, is a good thing. But so doesn't matter. And if you're not 65 and older, maybe you have parents that are 65 and older. And if they're not super physically active, maybe this is what you say. Again, number one killer in the United States, number one killer in the world is cardiovascular disease. And you can significantly lower your risk, up to about half actually, by just a small amount of exercise every day. All right. You guys know I'm obsessed with sleep. I've got my Oura ring that tracks my REM sleep and my deep sleep and my heart rate variability and all this crazy stuff. Half of it I don't even understand because I've got to fix my sleep. It's been a problem for 15 years now, and I'm working on it, and the Oura ring's helping. Well, and I've talked about lots of different ways that you can get better sleep. In fact, recently on this show, we talked about strength training or resistance training might actually be good to help you sleep. But here is another one that you probably haven't heard as far as getting better sleep. And that is a study that was published in Sleep Health showed this. They looked at over 1,300 adults measuring levels of EPA and DHA. I think that's eicosapentaenoic acid, and I forget what the DHA stands for. I should know this. I'm studying for my anti-aging and regenerative medicine boards. But these are omega-3 fatty acids, basically fish oil, but they were measuring blood levels of omega-3 fatty acids among adults who had very short sleep, less than 5 hours of sleep a night, and normal sleep, 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And what they found is that the people with low amounts of DHA, EPA, and overall omega-3 fatty acids tended to be more likely to be in the short sleep group, especially somewhere between 5 and 6 hours a night. This matters because 2/3 of Americans in this country, at least the adults, do not get enough omega-3 fatty acids in their diet. Now, that's usually fatty fishes, things like salmon that have high levels of omega-3 fatty acids. But you can take them as a supplement. I am a big believer in that. Not medical advice. I'm just saying I am a big fan of omega-3 fatty acids for a number of reasons. It's thought to be good for your heart. It's thought to be good for your mental health. Now it's looking like sleep. Another area that I think, maybe I'll talk about this sometime soon, that omega-3 fatty acids, I've started talking to my patients about this. It may be another one of those supplements you think about if you're dealing with arthritis, degenerative neck, degenerative back conditions. I've talked, and I'll talk probably more about curcumin, the active ingredient in turmeric, seems to be very good at blocking those inflammatory cytokines that cause a lot of the bone and cartilage damage in arthritis. EGCG is found in green tea as a green tea supplement or EGCG supplement because green tea has the epigallocatechins in it, just not that much. You'd have to drink way too much green tea. You'd never sleep. But this may be one of those. Curcumin, EGCGs in green tea, and omega-3 fatty acids may have a role as far as arthritis and that type of problem. All right, and then the last one I want to talk about, and I've talked about this a little bit before, so if you've heard this, I apologize, but we're going to talk real quickly before we get into Thymosin Beta 4. We're going to talk about spending time alone, and is it good for your health? Is it good for your happiness, or are you better off being around other people? So these Israeli researchers looked at, and I want to say they were college students that they did this, but they basically had to fill out this survey where 3 times a day they had to answer, and it came at various points of the time, but it was in the Journal of Happiness Studies. I actually read this a few weeks ago. That's why I apologize for not remembering how they did the study. But if I remember correctly, they took these college students and basically multiple times a day they'd get a text or something, and they had to say, and this went on for like 10 days, what are you doing right now? And then not just what you were doing, but were you with other people, or are you are you alone? Then it would ask, How do you feel? Various mood related things. And then the kicker was they asked if you were alone or if you were with other people, was that by choice or you had to do that some way? So you probably wouldn't be surprised to know that the people that were with other people tended to have higher levels of happiness. That's not surprising. Certainly, people seem to be happier when they were with other people than when they were alone. But that was only true for people that were alone sort of involuntarily. They didn't want to be alone, but they were for whatever reason. The people who were alone who did that by choice, they just chose to be alone for whatever reason, didn't have any of that issue at all, and they had perfectly normal and equally high levels of happiness. So it doesn't seem to be that it's so much, are we spending time with other people or are we spending time alone? It's that we are doing it voluntarily, that we have choice in the matter. People sometimes ask me about, because I spend a lot of time alone, a lot of what I do with these videos and the TV interviews and the writing and, hell, I wrote a book that took forever, and maybe I'll write another one soon. Those are very solitary things, but there's something that I choose to do. Now, if I am alone and not by choice and I'm sort of sad about that, that's different, and maybe I wouldn't be so happy about that. But so that's one of those things that it might be a little surprising, because we just assume that you need to be around other people to make you happy. And even when you look at like the blue zones, look at the book that looked at the centenarians, the places in the world where there's a huge percentage or a large percentage of people that live to 100 years old, one of the common factors was social networks. So that's all good. But again, it's not necessarily the people per se, it's whether you choose to be alone or with other people. All right, I see Ramsey Knighton, I don't know if I'm saying that. I probably am not going to have time to talk about medical questions, injury questions on this show, but if you join me Friday, I told you I wasn't feeling good. Tomorrow, Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, come live, ask me those questions. I will definitely address those in. But what I want to get to now, we're going to spend 5 or 6 minutes on Thymosin Beta 4. I have talked about peptides a few times on this show, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from people that will email me after the fact, people that say, hey, I want to learn more about peptides. I talked about BPC 157 and how it might help muscle healing, how it might help tendon and ligament healings. I've put those videos on my website. They're on my YouTube channel. And people have really enjoyed it, but they wanted me to talk about some of the other peptides. And there's a number of other peptides out there. The Thymosin Beta 4 or TB4 that we're going to talk about here, but there's growth hormone releasing peptides like CJC 1295 and ipamorelin. There's MOD-SC, which is a really exciting one I'm going to talk about next week. Thought to be good not just for weight loss and body fat, but also athletic performance, fitness, things like that. There's peptides for sleep, there's peptides for your brain, there's peptides for your heart, there's peptides for being antimicrobial and warding off infections and all sorts of things. I can't even begin to tell you all that they are. So people wanted me to talk about some of the other peptides out there. But my interest is in orthopedic surgery and sports medicine, so I tend to focus on things that play a role in your ability to run and lift weights and just feel better overall. So we're going to talk about Thymosin Beta 4 or TB4. It's also called TB500. There is a variation of TB4 called TB4 Frag, and I'll briefly mention that. But if you missed that Better Than Ever live show where I talked about BPC, let me at least go over what a peptide is. So peptides are short chains of amino acids or small proteins that are found naturally in our body. There's been like 7,000 peptides identified in our body. You've probably heard of one called insulin. That's what helps us regulate glucose that comes in from our food. Diabetics, type 1 diabetics at least, lack insulin or they have insulin resistance. And so insulin is a peptide. It's made naturally in our bodies and it controls glucose. But again, there's peptides for all different systems in our body that are naturally made, and they do all sorts of things. They're involved in almost every bodily reaction. They're basically communication signals or signaling molecules. They sort of control various functions throughout the body. Maybe hormones, it may be cell signaling, cell-to-cell communication. Each peptide has a specific job or a specific role. Some have more roles than others, and we'll talk about that as it pertains to TB4. But it basically, what it does, the peptide binds to a receptor on a particular cell, causes a chemical reaction, and then goes away. They have very, very short half-lives, so they're thought to be very, very safe. That's actually one of the differences between peptides and hormones, like steroids, which stay in your body all kinds of time and have all kinds of effects, but they may be good, they may be bad, because they stick around for a long period of time. Peptides are thought to be very safe because they have a very short half-life. Now, another interesting point as it pertains to orthopedic problems is just generally in our bodies, we tend to have really high levels of peptides when we're kids and young adults, but those levels of peptides go down with age. It's thought to be one of the reasons why some of the tendon injuries people suffer in their 40s, 50s, maybe early 60s happen then and not when you're a teenage athlete or a young adult. Achilles tendon rupture, biceps tendon rupture, things like that. That's one of the theories, is that we lack the peptides to strengthen the tendons and help them heal. Now, before we get into TB4 specifically, please understand peptides are considered experimental. The FDA is looking into the pharmacological assessment of peptides, in their words. That's what it says on their site. There are people out there that believe that they are protecting the interests of the big pharmaceutical companies so they can bring these to market for very expensive drugs that are sold at CVS and Walgreens and places like that. I can't say that. I will say the FDA is trying to make sure that people get peptides that they're safe. If that's the case, I certainly understand it. They are being very strict about this. There have been about 60 peptides that have been approved by the FDA. There's over 150 being developed right now. There's hundreds that are going through clinical trials. And yeah, we're going to see more and more of these come out as pharmaceutical medications by the big drug companies in the next few years. And again, I'm not trying to give you medical advice, and I'm really not even trying to influence you one way or the other about whether peptides like Thymosin Beta 4 are right for you. I just want to help you understand what they are, because I promise you will hear about these. If you want to go down an interesting Google rabbit hole for about 45 minutes to an hour, Google the term Wolverine stack. Wolverine, like the movie, Hugh Jackman, he gets cut by a sword or he gets shot and then heals instantly. Well, somebody, I don't know who did it, nicknamed the combination of BPC 157 and TB4 or Thymosin Beta 4, called it the Wolverine stack. And if you go to the do a Google search and ignore the movie references and go to the ones that they tend to be bodybuilding message boards, powerlifting message boards, you're going to see all kinds of people telling stories about how they had some shoulder surgery, couldn't lift weights, were hurting like crazy, weren't getting any better. Then somebody put them on the Wolverine stack, and now they have no pain and they're able to lift weights completely normally. It's crazy the stories you hear. People that have raved about peptides have been known about by the pro athlete world and the bodybuilders and the powerlifters probably for close to a decade. It is just now sort of getting a little bit of mainstream thing. But yeah, if you got time to kill, Google Wolverine stack sometimes. It is a fascinating deep dive rabbit hole thing. All right, Thymosin Beta 4. All right, this is a peptide that's naturally produced in our thymosin gland. We talked about BPC 157 a few weeks ago. That comes from our gastric lining, our stomach juice. But TB4 comes from our thymus gland, or an immune gland. 43 amino acid sequence. It's found in pretty much any cell in our body. But what's interesting is it's in much higher concentration in areas of tissue damage. So if you injure your muscle, tweak your knee or something, and then did tissue samples 12 hours later, 24 hours later, you're going to have higher levels of TB4 in those cells than you have in other parts of the body. Now, TB4 has what we call pleiotropic effects. I said that a lot of these peptides have a very specific role. TB4, like BPC, is a peptide that has multiple effects on different parts of the body, not just orthopedic. It's thought to be shown, and there's studies that show it's good for alcoholic liver injury and liver fibrosis. eye injuries, eye infections, peripheral neuropathies, people with nerve problems from diabetes or other things, people with strokes. It's been shown to be helpful for hair loss. I've heard more stories than I care to remember about kids that lose their hair from some infection, or women that lose their hair from Lyme or some other disease process that get it back with TB4. I don't know necessarily for just male pattern baldness how it works. I don't do hair loss, so I don't know much about that. TB4 hadn't been studied as much for orthopedic injuries like muscle injuries, tendon, ligament injuries, osteoarthritis, but given how TB4 works, it's easy to kind of understand how these potentially could help for orthopedic injuries. TB4 has been shown to improve healing in a lot of ways. One, it works at the cellular level to support tissue stem cells in the area to basically proliferate and heal and regenerate the injured tissue. It increases collagen deposition at the area of injury, and tendons and ligaments and muscle largely involve collagen fibers as part of their substance. TB4 activates progenitor cells which help repair damaged tissue. It's a very, very potent wound healer. If you have a wound infection or a wound that just isn't healing, TB4 apparently is very good at promoting wound healing with little to no scarring. And then another area where I really think there's potential is it's a very, very, very potent anti-inflammatory, whether it's for wounds, it's for muscles, it's for joints like arthritis, or acute or chronic pain. At a cellular level, TB4 upregulates building proteins like actin, which if you remember from high school biology, actin and myosin are the contractile filaments of muscle, so that it can promote healing, cell growth, cell migration, and cell proliferation. You can understand now why, in theory, these would help for orthopedic injuries. And what's interesting is TB4 seems to do very well, be very good at traveling to a site of injury. So if you hurt your ankle, TB4 is going to go down to your ankle. If you hurt your hamstring, it's going to go down to your hamstring, which is why you probably see it in higher quantities in areas of tissue damage. But again, there isn't that much research, and I literally did like a 2-hour PubMed search, deep dive on Thymosin Beta 4 for muscle injuries, tendon and ligament injuries. But there are peptide experts in this country who have used these for a long period of time who do believe that they're helpful for healing muscle injuries, whether it's hamstring, calf, quadriceps injuries, or tendon injuries, tennis elbow, Achilles tendonitis, Achilles tendinopathy, rotator cuff injuries. And one of the things that they argue that it does is that it prevents adhesion and fibrous band formation in the injured tissue. A lot of times our muscles, our tendons and ligaments heal sort of haphazardly with the fibers kind of all over the place. If you were a kid and you remember the game Pickup Sticks, that's how our tissues tend to heal. With Thymosin Beta 4, the argument goes is that they heal more quickly, but the collagen fibers are much more normally aligned, so they get back to normal strength, normal function much, much quicker. Now, I told you with BPC, it's thought to be equally available, bioavailable, whether you take it as a pill or as an injection. It doesn't really matter, and so a lot of people take it as a pill because that's easy to do. TB4 can be taken as a pill, but there's questions about how bioavailable it is as an oral form of TB4 or TB500 or TB4 frag. Most of the studies I've seen on TB4, it's administered as an injection. Basically, you just give it to yourself. You just pinch a little bit of the skin in your abdomen and you give it to yourself as an injection. But again, there is a pill form of this. It's just there's debate about how much of that is absorbed and sent to the rest of your body. Another thing that you need to think about, if you're like, hey, I've looked into the Wolverine stack and want BPC and TB4, get it. And this is not medical advice. This is just advice from a physician generally. Definitely talk to your doctor about peptides and potentially get them from a doctor and not from these online sites that sell peptides for research purposes only. That'll be in the fine print, but I promise you it's on there. You have to have a prescription for peptides. So if you're buying them online, you're not buying ones meant for human use. This is really, really dangerous. And this isn't true just with peptides. This is true with the SARMs, the selective androgen receptor modulators that the bodybuilders use to get really strong. These are really dangerous. You just don't know what you're getting. The websites look legitimate. They make all kinds of safety claims, but these companies, these pharmacies, these labs are not inspected by the FDA. It's very likely there's not actually going to be any peptide in it, or there's going to be very little. But worse than that, they're going to very likely have contaminants and endotoxins that make people really sick. I've heard reports of people getting liver damage, serious liver damage from peptides that they bought online. Please don't do that. Get them from a doctor that knows this kind of thing. It's interesting. I was watching this webinar about the FDA and peptides, and somebody tried to find all these companies that sold peptides online, like find an address, and they're all basically PO boxes somewhere. There's like not a physical thing. They're just getting them from China or wherever else, but they're basically just, the FDA can't shut them down because all they're going to find is a post office box. They can change their URL for their website and just sell more. It's very dangerous to buy peptides online. I know they're much cheaper online than they're going to be in a doctor's office, but the doctor's offices are getting them from pharmacies that have been approved by the FDA. There's a very stringent process to get the trifluoroacetic acids and the various things that keep them stable, and done in a way that's very safe with no contaminants and things like that. And that costs money, unfortunately. Peptides aren't cheap, there's no question. But I really would tell people, try to avoid getting them online. And again, like some of the other peptides we talked about, Thymosin Beta 4 is not approved by the FDA. It's not considered standard of care for most injuries and diseases. And I'm not giving you medical advice or trying to convince you, good or bad, about peptides like Thymosin Beta 4 and whether they're ready for you. I just want you to understand them so you can consider talking to your doctor about them and deciding what to do. So if you have any comments about Thymosin Beta 4, definitely leave those. Megan says, great to know. I appreciate it. Knighton, like I say, I would love to. I only do the orthopedic injuries on Fridays, Ask Dr. Geier live show. So join me there, and I promise I'll answer. Just try to be there at noon tomorrow. I just don't do that on this show because this is also recorded as a podcast, which reminds me to tell you, if you like this show but you can't be here Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m., subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, anywhere. I think I'm on like 25 different podcast directories. So definitely subscribe to Better Than Ever Live, and you can listen to it at the gym. You can listen to it on your drive to work or your drive home from work. And again, subscribe to the channel. Put this on the screen. Let me take Megan's comment off. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click the bell to be notified when I'm online, and when I do either release a new video or when I join online for one of these or for Ask Dr. Geier Live or anything that happens spontaneously. I talk about things about optimal health, optimal wellness, healing and recovery from orthopedic injuries, so you can feel and perform your best regardless of age, injury, or medical history. Make sure to subscribe. I'm also starting Ask Dr. Geier Live, or not Ask Dr. Geier Live, but Ask Dr. Geier recorded videos where I'll maybe once a week just answer a question that I tend to get a lot. I did that for years, and then I sort of got away from it, but I might start that again soon, but that probably wouldn't be live. But again, if you have any really question you want to ask that live, Fridays, 12 p.m. Eastern time. Also, one of the things I've been toying around with, I don't know how many of you remember the That's Gotta Hurt show where nightly I was talking about sports injuries, pro and college athletes getting hurt and what the injuries were. I enjoyed it, but some nights there just weren't injuries to talk about. I may revisit that and do it, but just do it weekly, and maybe do it like Sunday night or late Sunday afternoon, especially during the NFL season, sort of after the afternoon games. So that may be coming. If you really were interested in me explaining what these injuries were and what to look out for when these girls may get back to sports, that may be coming soon. And as always, if you have an orthopedic injury, you want to see somebody who truly understands bone and joint injuries in athletes and active people, I would love to help you. I'm a double board certified orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine specialist, and I'll talk to you about all your options, not just surgery, not just cortisone shots or physical therapy. I see people in my Charleston office for people that actually want to be treated. I also do some coaching where it's sort of done online, but I'm not actually treating you. I'm not sending you medications or anything like that. So that is an option. But if you want me to treat you and talk to you about all your options and potentially we try some of those options, come to Charleston, South Carolina. It's beautiful any day but today, just not super beautiful today. Go to my website. In the description below, it has my website. Go in the upper right corner, you'll see a box that says work with me. Click on it. You'll see a contact page. You fill out the form and it gets to my assistant and we can help set that up. So definitely check that out. If you have friends that like information about health and wellness, tell them about this show. Make sure they subscribe. And on the podcast, I'd love it if you could leave 5-star reviews. That would be great. Anyway, that's all I got for you. My name's, again, Dr. David Geier. Thank you so much for watching. Look forward to helping you feel and perform better than ever. I will see you tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern Time.